The stagecoach lurched to a brutal stop outside Fort Kearney, Nebraska, and Thea Vaughn could no longer feel her fingers inside her thin cotton gloves. The January cold of 1878, having seeped through every thread during the 3-day journey from Omaha that should have taken half the time before the blizzard hit. She tried to grip the door handle to let herself out, but her hands refused to obey, the flesh pale white and waxy, and she felt a stab of fear sharper than the wind that howled across the prairie. This was supposed to be her fresh start, her escape from the textile factories of Boston where she had worked since she was 14. Her chance at a real life with a man who had written such kind letters over the past 6 months. Now she could not even open a door. The driver appeared, his face wrapped in wool scarves, and he looked at her with concern. "Miss, you all right? You look terrible pale." "I cannot feel my hands," she said, and her voice sounded distant even to her own ears. "I think something is wrong." He cursed under his breath and reached in to help her down, but when he took her arm, she stumbled on legs that had gone numb from the cold and the long hours of sitting. She fell against him, and he caught her awkwardly, shouting for help. The street was nearly empty, most sensible people having taken shelter from the bitter weather, but a few figures moved through the swirling snow. "Someone get Doc Miller," the driver yelled, "and find Xander Kincaid. His bride just came in." Thea tried to speak, to say she would be fine, that she just needed to warm up, but her teeth were chattering so hard she bit her tongue. Blood filled her mouth with a copper taste. The world tilted, and she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake leaving everything familiar behind for a man she had never met. A rancher who needed a wife, and had placed an advertisement in the Boston newspaper that her friend had shown her one day during their lunch break. Strong arms lifted her, different arms than the driver's, and she looked up through snow-crusted eyelashes to see a face that matched the single photograph she had received 3 months ago. Xander Kincaid was even more handsome in person, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his hat, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of amber that looked at her with genuine worry. He was perhaps 26 or 27, only a few years older than her own 23 years. "I have got you," he said, and his voice was deep and warm. "Let us get you inside before you freeze solid." He carried her across the street and into a building that proved to be the general store, where a pot-bellied stove radiated blessed heat. Several people were inside, and they all turned to look as Xander brought her near the stove and gently set her down in a wooden chair. An older woman immediately began fussing over her, pulling at her inadequate coat and exclaiming over the state of her. "Lord have mercy, this girl is frozen through. Xander, what kind of fool woman comes to Nebraska in January dressed like she is going to a spring social?" A Boston woman who did not know better, Thea managed to say through her chattering teeth. "The letters said it was cold, but I thought my winter coat would suffice." The woman snorted. "That is not a winter coat, honey. That is barely an autumn jacket. I am Harriet Monroe, and you just sit tight while we get you warmed up proper." A man who must be the doctor arrived, pushing through the door with a blast of cold air. He was older, perhaps 50, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He knelt beside Thea and took her hands gently in his own, peeling off the wet gloves that had done nothing to protect her. His expression grew serious as he examined her fingers, which were white and hard to the touch. "Frostbite," he said grimly. "Not the worst I have seen, but bad enough. We need to warm these slowly, very slowly, or we risk making it worse. Xander, you have the steadiest hands I know. I need you to help me with this." Xander knelt on her other side, and Thea noticed how large his hands were, calloused from work but moving with surprising gentleness. The doctor gave instructions, and Xander began to carefully warm her hands between his own, not rubbing, just holding them and letting his body heat gradually transfer to her frozen fingers. It should have been awkward, this intimate contact with a stranger she was supposed to marry, but instead it felt like a lifeline. "This is going to hurt when the feeling comes back," Doc Miller warned. "Might hurt something fierce, but you have got to let it happen natural-like." He was right. As warmth slowly returned to her fingers, pain came with it, a burning, stabbing sensation that made her gasp and try to pull away. Xander held firm, his eyes meeting hers. "I know it hurts," he said softly, "but you have to bear it. I will stay right here with you. I am not going anywhere." Tears leaked from her eyes, from the pain, and from the overwhelming relief that this man, her future husband, was proving to be as kind as his letters had suggested. She had been so afraid on the long journey west, wondering if she had been foolish to trust words on paper, to trade her hard but familiar life for complete uncertainty. Her parents were long dead, lost to cholera when she was 12, and her only sister had married and moved to California 5 years ago. There had been nothing holding her in Boston except a job that was slowly killing her, standing 14 hours a day in a factory full of lint and noise. "Tell me about yourself," Xander said, clearly trying to distract her from the pain. "Your letters were wonderful, but there is so much more I want to know." "Like what?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Like what is your favorite color?" Despite everything, she almost laughed. "That is what you want to know. My favorite color. It is as good a place to start as any." "Green," she said. "The green of new grass in spring. I have not seen much green these past years working in the factory. Everything there was gray and brown." "Well, you will see plenty of green come spring," he said. "The prairie turns every shade of green you can imagine when the grass starts growing. It is beautiful in a way that takes your breath away." "What is your favorite color?" she asked, needing to focus on something other than the fire in her hands. "Blue," he said without hesitation. "The blue of the sky on a clear day, so bright and endless you feel like you could fall right up into it." They talked while he warmed her hands, trading small details and observations, while Harriet bustled around bringing her hot tea that she had to sip carefully because her lips were still numb. The doctor checked her feet and declared them cold but not frostbitten, since her boots had been sturdier than her gloves. Gradually, agonizingly, feeling returned to all her fingers. They were bright red and swollen, and the doctor warned that she would need to be very careful with them for several days, but he thought she would make a full recovery. "You are lucky," he said seriously. "Another hour in that cold and you might have lost fingers, maybe your whole hand." Thea looked at Xander, who was still kneeling beside her, still holding her hands gently in his. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved me." "I could hardly let my bride lose her fingers before we even got properly introduced," he said, and there was something warm in his eyes that made her heart skip. "Though I have to say, this is not quite how I pictured our first meeting." "I am sorry," she said. "I must look terrible. I wanted to make a good impression." "You look half frozen and completely beautiful," he said simply. "And I am just glad you are here, even if you did pick the worst possible time of year to travel." Harriet snorted again. "That is the truth. January in Nebraska is not fit for man nor beast. Xander, you cannot take her out to your ranch in this weather. She needs to stay in town until this blizzard passes and she has recovered a bit." "I have a room at the boarding house," Xander said. "Miss Vaughn can take it. I will bunk at the livery stable." "Nonsense," Harriet said firmly. "She will stay with me and my husband. We have an extra room since our son moved out to start his own place. You can stay where you are, and we will all act like civilized people until you two get properly married." Xander looked at Thea. "Is that acceptable to you, Mrs.?" Monroe is one of the finest women in Fort Kearney, and you would be in good hands." "I do not want to impose," Thea said. "It is not an imposition," Harriet said. "It is common Christian decency. Now let us get you over to my house before you catch your death. And Xander, you go talk to Reverend Thomas about a wedding. I assume you still want to marry this girl." Xander smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and almost boyish. "I do, very much. Miss Vaughn, if you are still willing after this rough welcome, I would be honored to make you my wife as soon as you are ready." Thea looked at this man who had knelt beside her for an hour, patiently warming her frozen hands, who looked at her with such kindness despite her bedraggled appearance, and felt something settle in her chest. "I came all this way to marry you," she said. "A little frostbite is not going to change my mind." The next few days passed in a blur of recovery and preparation. Harriet Monroe proved to be exactly as kind as Xander had suggested, fussing over Thea like a mother hen and sharing all the gossip about Fort Kearney and its inhabitants. The town was smaller than Thea had expected, maybe 200 people in total, built around the old fort that had been established as a way station on the Oregon Trail decades earlier. The fort itself was no longer active, but the town had grown up around it and persisted, serving the ranchers and farmers who had claimed land in the surrounding area. Thea's hands healed slowly, the swelling going down and the angry red color fading to pink. The doctor visited twice to check on her, pronouncing himself satisfied with her progress. Meanwhile, Xander came by every afternoon to visit, always proper and polite, never staying too long but clearly eager to get to know her better. They would sit in Harriet's parlor and talk, sharing stories about their lives, their hopes, their dreams. She learned that he had come to Nebraska 6 years ago at age 21 with his father and older brother to start a cattle ranch. His father had died of a heart ailment 3 years ago, and his brother had been killed just last year when his horse threw him and he hit his head on a rock. Xander was now alone on the ranch, managing it by himself with the help of 2 hired hands, and he needed a wife not just for companionship but for practical reasons too. Running a ranch was hard work, and there were things that needed a woman's touch. "I do not want you to think I am just looking for free labor," he said earnestly during one visit. "I could hire a housekeeper if that was all I needed. I want a partner, someone to build a life with. My parents had that kind of marriage where they were true equals, and that is what I hope for too." "What if I am terrible at ranch work?" Thea asked. "I have never lived anywhere but the city. I know nothing about cattle or horses or any of it." "Then I will teach you," he said simply. "And you can teach me whatever you know. I assume you can read and write, since your letters were so well written?" "Yes, and I can sew and cook, though factory work did not leave much time for either. I used to love reading before I started at the factory. I had to sell most of my books when money got tight, but I kept a few favorites." "I have books," Xander said, his face lighting up. "Not many, but some. My mother loved to read, and I inherited that from her. We can share them." This small detail that he loved books too made Thea happier than she could explain. She had imagined that life on a ranch would be all hard work and no time for the things she enjoyed, but maybe it did not have to be that way. The weather cleared on the 4th day after her arrival, the sky turning that brilliant blue that Xander had described as his favorite color. He came to Harriet's house in the morning, looking nervous and hopeful at the same time. "Reverend Thomas can marry us this afternoon if you are willing," he said. "Or we can wait longer if you need more time. I do not want to rush you." Thea thought about it. By the standards of her time, this was not rushing at all. Many mail-order brides married their husbands within hours of meeting them. She had already spent more time with Xander than most, and everything she had learned about him only made her more certain that she had made the right choice. "This afternoon would be perfect," she said. The wedding was simple, held in the small church with Harriet and her husband as witnesses, along with Doc Miller and a few other townspeople who wanted to wish them well. Thea wore a dress that Harriet had helped her make over the past few days from fabric bought at the general store, a simple blue cotton that matched her eyes. Xander wore his best suit, clearly not something he wore often, and he looked so handsome that Thea felt her breath catch when she saw him waiting for her at the front of the church. Reverend Thomas was a young man, probably not much older than Xander, with an earnest manner and a warm smile. He led them through the traditional vows, and when Xander promised to love, honor, and cherish her, he looked into her eyes with such sincerity that she felt tears prick her own eyes. She made the same promises back, and meant every word, even though a week ago she had not known this man existed beyond words on paper. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Thomas said, and Xander leaned in carefully, giving her the gentlest kiss, just a soft press of lips that somehow felt more intimate than anything Thea had ever experienced. They had a small celebration dinner at the boarding house, where the owner had prepared a special meal in honor of the occasion. Thea found herself laughing and talking with the townspeople who had come, feeling welcomed in a way she had not expected. These people were willing to accept her as one of their own just because she had married Xander, and she realized that this was what community meant in a place like this. As the evening wore on and the guests began to drift away, Thea felt nervousness flutter in her stomach. She was married now, truly married, and there were expectations that came with that. She knew what happened between husbands and wives on their wedding night, though her knowledge was more theoretical than practical. She had certainly never experienced it herself. Xander must have sensed her nervousness because he took her hand gently as they walked to his room at the boarding house, where they would spend their first night together, before heading out to the ranch in the morning. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said quietly. "I know this is all very new and strange. You are my husband," she said. "I want to be a proper wife to you." "You are already a proper wife," he said. "Just by being here, by choosing to take a chance on me, everything else can happen in its own time." But when they were alone in the room, with the door closed and the lamp burning low, Thea found that she did want this, wanted to feel close to this man who had been so kind to her. She let him help her out of her dress, his fingers fumbling slightly with the buttons, both of them nervous and excited. When they finally came together, it was awkward and tender and nothing like the clinical descriptions she had heard from other women, because there was genuine caring between them, a foundation they had already begun to build. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow, Thea felt more at peace than she had in years. This was her life now, this man and this place, and she was going to make it work. They left for the ranch early the next morning, Xander driving a wagon loaded with Thea's trunk and supplies from the general store. The ranch was about an hour outside of town, and as they drove, Xander pointed out landmarks and told her about the land. He owned 640 acres, a full square mile that he had claimed and proven up on, and ran about 200 head of cattle. It was not a huge operation, but it was respectable, and it was all his. The house came into view as they crested a low hill, and Thea felt her heart sink a little. It was small, just a simple cabin really, made of logs with a sod roof. Xander saw her expression and looked apologetic. "I know it is not much," he said. "My father built it when we first came here, and we always meant to build something bigger once we had the money. But then he died, and after my brother died, I just did not see the point when it was only me. But we can improve it now. We can add on rooms, maybe even build a proper house in a few years if the ranch does well. It is fine, Thea said quickly, not wanting him to think she was ungrateful. It is more than fine. It is ours. The inside was neat but sparse, clearly the home of a man living alone. There was a main room that served as kitchen and living area, with a fireplace for cooking and heat, and a single bedroom off to the side. Everything was clean but basic, the furniture rough-hewn and functional rather than beautiful. I am not much of a housekeeper, Xander admitted. I kept it clean enough, but I know it needs a woman's touch to really be a home. Thea walked around, taking it all in, and felt a surprising sense of possibility. This was a blank slate, a place she could shape and make her own. She had never had that before, had always lived in spaces owned by other people, first her parents' tenement, then the factory dormitory, then various boarding houses. This was hers now, hers and Xander's together. "Show me everything," she said. "I want to learn how everything works." Over the next few weeks, Xander proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to manage the household on a ranch. There was no running water, so she had to learn to haul it from the well. There was no store around the corner, so she had to learn to plan carefully and make supplies last. Cooking on the fireplace was different from the coal stove she had used in the boarding house, and it took her several tries to figure out how to regulate the heat properly. But she also discovered things she loved about this new life. She loved the vast openness of the prairie, so different from the cramped streets of Boston. She loved the silence, broken only by wind and birdsong and the distant lowing of cattle. She loved watching Xander work, seeing the competence and strength in everything he did. And she loved the quiet evenings when they would sit by the fire after supper, reading aloud to each other from the small collection of books, or just talking about their days. The two ranch hands, Clem and Josiah, were initially wary of her, as if they expected her to try to change everything or make their lives difficult. But Thea made a point of being friendly and helpful, and when she figured out how to make decent biscuits, winning them over completely, they became her champions. "Best decision Xander ever made, bringing you here," Clem said one morning when she brought out coffee and fresh biscuits to the men working on repairing a fence. "This place has been needing a woman around." Spring came slowly to Nebraska, the snow melting gradually and revealing the brown grass beneath. But then, as if by magic, the grass began to green up, and Thea understood what Xander had meant about every shade of green imaginable. The prairie transformed into a rolling sea of green and gold, and wildflowers began to bloom in profusion, splashes of color that made her gasp with delight. "I told you it was beautiful," Xander said, watching her reaction with obvious pleasure. They were sitting on the porch he had built onto the house, one of several improvements they had made together. The house was starting to feel like a real home, with curtains Thea had sewn for the windows and a garden plot she had started near the kitchen door. She was growing vegetables and herbs and had planted flowers too, just for the beauty of them. "I never imagined anything like this," she said honestly. "In Boston, spring just meant the mud smelled a bit less bad. This is like something from a painting." "Wait until you see a prairie sunset," he said. "Those will take your breath away." That evening he took her riding, something she had learned to do over the past months with his patient instruction. They rode up to a high point on their land, and watched as the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple that seemed impossible. The vastness of it all made Thea feel small and significant at the same time, a tiny part of something immense and beautiful. "I love you," Xander said suddenly, and Thea turned to look at him in surprise. They had not said those words to each other yet, though they had grown close over the months, sharing a bed and a life and learning each other's habits and quirks. "I know we started this marriage for practical reasons," he continued. "At least mostly practical. But somewhere along the way I fell in love with you. The way you laugh when something surprises you. The way you sing while you work, even though you claim you cannot carry a tune. The way you are not afraid to try new things, even when they are hard. I love you, Thea, and I needed you to know." Thea felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind this time. "I love you too," she said. "I think I started falling in love with you when you knelt beside me in the general store and warmed my frozen hands. You could have been annoyed or disappointed that I was such a mess. But instead, you were kind. You have been kind every day since, and I love you for that and for 100 other reasons." He kissed her then, there on the hillside with the sunset blazing around them, and it felt like a promise, like a new beginning even though they were already months into their marriage. This was when they truly became husband and wife in every sense, not just legally or physically, but emotionally. Two people who had chosen each other and meant it. That night marked a shift in their relationship. They had been partners before, working together to build a life. But now there was something deeper, a current of feeling that ran beneath everything they did. Xander became more affectionate, reaching for her hand when they walked, kissing her goodbye when he rode out to check on the cattle, holding her close at night as if he could not bear to be separated even in sleep. Thea bloomed under this affection, becoming more confident and sure of herself. She took on more responsibilities around the ranch, learning to help with the cattle work when Clem or Josiah needed an extra hand. She learned to ride well enough to go out on her own, exploring their land and the surrounding area. She even learned to shoot, though she never liked it much, after Xander insisted she needed to know how to protect herself when he was away. "There are predators out here," he said seriously. "Wolves sometimes and mountain lions, though they mostly stay further west. And sometimes there are dangerous men, outlaws or drifters looking to cause trouble. I need to know you can take care of yourself." She understood his concern, even though she hoped she would never need to use the skills he taught her. The West could be dangerous, especially for women alone. She had heard stories in town about ranches being robbed, women being attacked. It was a hard land and it made hard people sometimes. But mostly, life was peaceful and good. Summer came hot and bright, and they worked long days to make hay and tend the growing cattle herd. Thea learned to help with the haying, driving the wagon while the men forked the cut grass into it, and she felt pride in her new strength and capability. She was not the same girl who had arrived half frozen in January. She was becoming a ranch woman, capable and strong. In late summer, Thea began to feel unwell in the mornings, and at first she worried she had eaten something bad. But when it continued for a week, and when she realized her monthly courses had not come when expected, she understood what was happening. She was pregnant, carrying Xander's child, and the realization filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She told Xander that evening after supper, watching his face anxiously to see his reaction. He stared at her for a long moment as if processing the information, and then suddenly swept her up in his arms, spinning her around and laughing with pure delight. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Thea, we are going to be parents. Are you happy?" She asked, even though his reaction made the answer obvious. "I am the happiest man in Nebraska," he said. "Probably the happiest man in the whole country. You have given me everything I ever hoped for, a true home and family." The pregnancy was not easy. Thea was sick almost every morning for months, and as she grew larger, the work became harder. Xander tried to make her rest more, but there was always so much to do on a ranch, and Thea was not good at sitting idle. Harriet came out from town several times to visit and check on her, bringing advice and supplies and welcome company. "You are doing fine," Harriet assured her during one visit. "Every woman feels huge and uncomfortable by the end, but it will all be worth it when you hold that baby in your arms." Thea hoped she was right. She had seen women die in childbirth, knew it was always a risk, especially out here far from doctors and hospitals. But she tried not to dwell on the fear, focusing instead on preparing for the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny clothes and blankets, and Xander built a cradle from wood he carefully selected and sanded smooth. Winter came around again, and Thea felt as if she had come full circle. It had been almost exactly a year since she arrived in Fort Kearny with frozen fingers and an uncertain future. Now she was warm and loved and about to become a mother, and she could hardly believe how much her life had changed. The baby came in late February during a cold snap that reminded Thea uncomfortably of her arrival. Doc Miller was there, having come out to the ranch a week earlier when Thea's time grew near, bunking with Clem and Josiah so he would be available when needed. The labor was long and hard, lasting nearly a full day and night, and there were moments when Thea thought she could not bear it any longer. But Xander stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand and wiping her forehead and murmuring encouragement. "You can do this," he kept saying. "You are the strongest woman I know, just a little longer." When the baby finally came, slipping into the world with a loud, healthy cry, Doc Miller announced, "You have got a son, a big, healthy boy." Thea wept with relief and joy as the doctor placed the baby in her arms. He was perfect, with dark hair like his father and tiny, perfect fingers that gripped hers with surprising strength. Xander sat beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, looking down at their son with an expression of such love and awe that Thea felt her heart might burst. "What should we name him?" she asked. "Thomas," Xander said without hesitation, "after my father, if that is all right with you." "Thomas Kincaid," Thea said, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the world." The baby years were hard in ways Thea had not anticipated. Thomas was a fussy baby who did not sleep well, and there were many nights when she and Xander took turns walking the floor with him, trying to soothe his crying. The work of the ranch did not stop for a new baby, and Thea found herself exhausted in a way she had never been before, even during her factory days. But there were good moments too, precious moments that made all the hardship worthwhile. Thomas's first smile, directed at his father when Xander was making silly faces at him. His first laugh, a gurgling belly laugh that made everyone in the house stop and grin. His first steps, taken toward Thea with his arms outstretched and trust in his eyes. By the time Thomas was 2, the ranch was doing well enough that Xander was able to hire an additional hand and begin building the larger house he had promised Thea. They kept the original cabin for the ranch hands and built a proper 2-story house with 4 bedrooms and a real kitchen with a new cast iron stove that Xander had ordered special from Omaha. "I want you to have every comfort I can give you," he said as they walked through the house together before the furniture was moved in. "You work so hard, and you deserve a beautiful home." "I am happy anywhere as long as I am with you," Thea said honestly. "But I will not pretend this house is not wonderful. I love it, Xander. Thank you." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Thomas grew into a curious, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, already learning about cattle and horses and ranch work. Thea managed the household and helped with the ranch accounts, discovering that she had a head for numbers. The ranch continued to prosper, and they were able to put money aside for the future. When Thomas was 4, Thea became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. The baby, A girl they named Alina after Xander's mother was born in spring with none of the drama of her brother's winter birth. She was a calm, happy baby who slept well and smiled often, and Thea sometimes wondered if God was giving her an easier second child to make up for the difficult first. 2 years later, another son arrived, whom they named Samuel after Thea's father. And 2 years after that, another daughter, Catherine, completed their family. The house that had seemed so large when they built it now felt full of noise and life and love, exactly as a home should be. Thea sometimes thought back to that frozen girl who had arrived in Fort Kearny so many years ago, scared and uncertain, with fingers so cold she could not feel them. That girl seemed like someone else now, someone from a different life. She had been transformed by this place, and this man, shaped into someone stronger and more capable than she ever imagined she could be. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xander took her back to that hillside where they had watched the sunset and confessed their love for each other. Harriet had agreed to watch the children for the evening, giving them a rare few hours alone together. They sat in the grass, older now and marked by years of hard work and child-rearing, but still very much in love. "Do you ever regret it?" Xander asked. "Leaving Boston, coming out here to marry a stranger?" "Never," Thea said firmly. "This is the life I was meant to have. These are the people I was meant to love. Everything that came before was just leading me here to you." "I think about your fingers sometimes," he said, taking her hands in his and running his thumbs over her knuckles. "How cold they were that first day, how scared I was that you might lose them. And I think about how lucky I was that you chose to come, that you took a chance on me in this life." "You warmed my fingers," Thea said softly. "And then you warmed my heart. You gave me a home and a family and a life full of love. I am the lucky one, Xander." He kissed her then, and it still felt like the first time, that spark and connection that had grown into something deep and lasting. They watched the sunset together, the sky painting itself in brilliant colors, and Thea felt grateful for every moment that had brought her to this place. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges. Thomas grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, and it was clear he would take it over someday. Alina proved to have a gift for working with horses, gentle and patient in a way that even grown men respected. Samuel was the bookish one, always reading and asking questions, and Thea hoped he might become a teacher or perhaps even a lawyer someday. Catherine, the baby, was still finding her way, but she had a stubborn determination that reminded Thea of herself. Fort Kearny grew too, expanding as more people came west and settled the land. New businesses opened, and eventually a railroad spur was built that made shipping cattle much easier. The world was changing, becoming more modern and connected, but some things remained the same. The prairie still turned green in spring, the sunsets were still breathtaking, and the work of running a ranch was still hard and demanding. When Thea was 45, Harriet Monroe died peacefully in her sleep, and Thea mourned her like the mother she had become. Harriet had been there from the very beginning, had taken her in and cared for her, and guided her through those early uncertain days. The town turned out for the funeral, a testament to how loved Harriet had been, and Thea spoke about what Harriet had meant to her, how she had welcomed a frightened city girl and helped her become a part of the community. Doc Miller retired the same year, turning his practice over to a younger doctor fresh from medical school back east. Thea felt the passage of time acutely then, realizing that the people who had been there for her arrival were slowly disappearing, making way for new generations. But life went on, as it always did. Thomas married a young woman from town, a rancher's daughter named Mary who fit seamlessly into ranch life. They gave Thea and Xander their first grandchild, a boy they named Xander Jr., and Thea felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. Being a grandmother was different from being a mother, somehow both easier and more precious, because she could enjoy the children without the constant weight of responsibility. Eleanor married a horse breeder from Colorado and moved away, which hurt Thea's heart even though she knew it was natural and right. Samuel, as Thea had hoped, went to college and became a lawyer, settling in Omaha but visiting regularly. Catherine married a young man who worked at the bank in Fort Kearny and stayed close, much to Thea's delight. Through it all, Xander remained her constant, her partner and love. They grew old together, their faces becoming lined and their hair turning gray, but the love between them never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by years of shared experiences and mutual support. On their 30th anniversary, Xander was not feeling well, complaining of tiredness and pain in his chest. Thea wanted to send for the doctor, but he refused, insisting it was nothing, just age catching up with him. But that night, as they lay in bed together, he had a heart attack. Thea held him as he struggled to breathe, crying and begging him not to leave her. And in those terrible moments, she felt like that frozen girl again, helpless and scared. But he survived, thanks to the quick actions of the new doctor who Thea had sent Thomas to fetch despite Xander's protests. The doctor said Xander's heart was weak, and he needed to take things easy, which was a difficult adjustment for a man who had worked hard his entire life. But he did it, for Thea's sake, stepping back and letting Thomas and the hands manage more of the ranch work. They had 5 more good years together. Years of sitting on the porch watching grandchildren play, of quiet conversations and comfortable silences, of a love that needed no words to be understood. Xander died peacefully in his sleep when he was 62, and Thea woke to find him cold beside her, gone from her life as unexpectedly as he had entered it all those years ago. The grief was enormous, a physical weight that pressed down on her chest and made it hard to breathe. But she was not alone in it. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her, supporting her, and she realized that this was Xander's final gift to her, this family they had built together, these connections that would endure. She continued to live on the ranch, refusing all suggestions that she move to town or go live with one of the children. This was her home, full of memories and love, and she could feel Xander's presence in every corner of it. She took over managing the business side of the ranch, working with Thomas to keep it prosperous and growing, and found purpose in that work. Sometimes, in the evenings, she would walk up to that hillside where they had watched the sunset together and told each other they were in love. She would sit in the grass and talk to Xander as if he could hear her, telling him about the grandchildren and the ranch and all the small details of life. And she would watch the sun sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in those impossible colors, and feel grateful for every moment they had shared. Thea lived to be 78 years old, a remarkable age for the time and place. She lived long enough to see great-grandchildren born, to see the ranch prosper beyond anything she and Xander had dreamed, to see the new century dawn with all its changes and promises. She remained sharp and capable until nearly the end, still managing the ranch accounts and offering advice to anyone who asked. When she finally died, peacefully in her sleep like Xander had, surrounded by family, the whole town of Fort Kearny turned out for her funeral. People spoke about her kindness and her strength, about how she had arrived as a frightened city girl and become a pillar of the community, about the love she had shared with her husband and the family they had built together. Thomas, now a gray-haired man himself, stood before the gathering and told the story of how his parents had met, how his mother had arrived with frozen fingers and his father had patiently warmed them back to life. He saved her fingers that day, Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. But she saved his heart, gave him a reason to build a life worth living. And together, they built something beautiful, a family and a legacy that will continue long after we are all gone. They buried her beside Xander on a hill overlooking their ranch, where they could rest together under the big Nebraska sky they had both loved so much. The gravestone was simple, just their names and dates and a single line that said everything that needed to be said. Together in life, together in eternity. And on summer evenings, when the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, when the prairie grass rolled like waves in the wind, you could almost see them there together. A young cowboy and his mail-order bride, holding hands and watching the beauty of the land they had claimed and made their own. Their love story etched forever into the history of the West. The ranch continued to prosper through the generations, each one adding to what Xander and Thea had started. The house they had built still stood, added onto and improved but fundamentally the same, a testament to the foundation they had laid. And the story of how they met, how he had warmed her frozen fingers and won her heart, became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren. A reminder that the best love stories often begin with simple acts of kindness. In the end, Thea's gamble on a mail-order marriage had paid off beyond her wildest dreams. She had found not just a husband but a true partner, not just a home but a place where she belonged, not just survival but a life full of love and purpose and meaning. And though the journey had begun with cold and fear and uncertainty, it had led to warmth and joy and a love that lasted beyond death itself, a love that lived on in the hearts and memories of everyone they had touched.